In 2018, I brought this number before you, and tonight I want to bring you this number. That's right, we're currently enrolling the class of 2036 into our elementaries for kindergarten next year. And these students will be taking on careers that are not yet imagined, and so we'll have to figure out a way to make sure they're prepared for when they graduate in 2036 to be able to handle the careers, the employment, the education, or the enlistment that they choose to do. We've also talked in the past about how instruction has changed from the past to where it is currently and where it may be even going in the future. So tonight, as I go over our 5-year forecasts and our funding, just wanted you to keep those things in mind, because we always want to keep our students at the forefront of everything that we do, and to make sure that we are following our mission where all students are valued, challenged, and guided along their pathway to success. As part of our strategic plan, financial stability is one of our key pillars. And to maintain that, we want to keep in mind that we do have a community partnership, which says that we will not increase our expenses from year to year more than 3%, and that we will maintain a 60-day cash reserve balance, as well as since 2019, when we had our 7.5 mil operating levy, and our community asked us to come back more often with smaller levies, we look and plan for a rolling 5-year, 5 mil operating levy cycle. And we align our priorities, our resources to our instructional priorities. Internally, we're looking at how we're aligning our instructional priorities to make sure that we're spending at least 70% or more on instruction, because that is the core of what we do, and no more than 10% on any office or central office costs. So that includes the building offices, department offices, paper, the personnel, not only the administrators, but also the OPs and all of central office supports. We also have class size targets that we use for staffing, as well as a staffing plan. And we budget based on per pupil allocations, as well as square feet or per staff allocations. Currently, we have 2 operating levies, one in 2017 that expires in 2027, and one from 2019 that expires in 2029. Both of these would need to be renewed in order to maintain current operations. But also in 2021, as a board, you passed a resolution that said that we would need an operating levy again in 2024, which that would be this November. There have been some changes since November of 2019. We reduced our operations by $2.6 million, as we promised our community when we asked for the 7.5 mil levy. Then the pandemic shut us down, and we were able to have some savings from that spring, as well as we've had several unfilled positions, as well as turnover in the past several years. We've had some ESSER funding, or that was the federal pandemic relief funding, that we've been able to invest in our staff in our district so that we can maintain things in the future, as well as being able to shift some positions over to this funding to save it from the general fund for a couple of years, knowing that we would have to move that back next year, as we've talked about for the past couple of years. There's been a new state funding formula, and interest rates continue to increase. So with that, let's talk about what our impact is on our financial stability. In 2018, 1/2 of our revenue came from local property taxes, and 1/3 came from the state. Now, 2/3 of our revenue comes from local property taxes, and 1/4 comes from the state. So you can see the shift over time. We have an additional 11% that comes from things like tuition, interest, or the TIFs from Green Township, as well as prior year rebates such as Medicaid rebates. Things that drive our revenue, enrollment is a huge driver of revenue. That's how the state determines state funding. New construction can give us a bump in our tax revenue the year property is built, and then after that it rolls into the whole tax duplicate, as well as legislative changes such as the biennial budget, which is currently going through the process as we speak. When we look at our enrollment has maintained relatively stable for the past several years and is projected to continue to be about the same. The biennial budget, so the new fair school funding formula came into effect in fiscal year 22. And what this did is it allowed us to maintain $4 million a year from our students being educated elsewhere. So we have about 600 students that annually we would receive the state's portion, and then we would send the whole state and local out to where they were educated, whether they were community school, open enrolled, Peterson scholarships, things like that. The funding formula also has inputs for basic education based on 2018 costs, and it's 2023. So what this does is as valuation continues to increase, our community looks richer because the cost is staying lower. So we're trying, and we've been talking to both our representatives in the House and the Senate, that we need to increase those inputs in order to be able to have the inputs and the outputs, align so that it does not shift the burden onto local communities. The biennial budget, or in the new fair funding formula, also phased it in over 6 years, so we're currently being funded at 33% for the state's funding portion, and it's looking to go to 50% with the next biennial budget effective July 1. Some revenue changes that have occurred is on our forecast is this year we collected $2 million in delinquent taxes, so that's one-time money and it's not forecasted in the future to continue, as well as we will have update and reevaluation years during this 5-year forecast. So fiscal year 23, which will be collected in calendar year 23, which will be collected in calendar year 24, as well as 26 are update and reappraisal years. And our interest rates have increased, so we've been able to earn an additional $1.3 million this year relative to the past. When we look at our local, state, and local shares, you can see back in 2019 we had a 60-40 split. 60% was from our local community and 40% came from the state. Now we're at 75-25. So the new funding formula, while they removed the students being educated elsewhere out of the formula and we were able to keep those tax dollars here, what they did was it made us look richer. So the state is funding that directly, but they're also pushing the burden of the students that our community was always paying for more onto our local community. Currently, the state pays about $2,000 per student just for basic education. Anything above basic education is 100% locally funded, including maintenance of buildings, as well as any construction of buildings. And as you see, by the end of the forecast, we're about down to $1,000 per student. In 2018, we had about 76% of our expenses were for personnel, and another 20% was for purchase services. Part of that purchase services was just the cost of the students being educated elsewhere. Currently, we have 77% of our budget is for personnel. Again, we are service industries, but majority of our costs are spent on personnel, and our purchase services are down to 17% now that we are able to keep those dollars here for the students being educated elsewhere. Well, I say we keep the dollars here, and that's 600 students that we no longer have. We never had those students, but when you're looking at the number enrolled was a little around 8,000, we have to service around 9,700 students in different departments throughout the district. So there's more than just the butts and seats in the district that we do have to serve. Things that affect our expenses are, of course, inflation, and right now we do have had high inflation, as well as special education costs and poverty are drivers of cost. Some expenditure changes that have occurred is we've had to shift from personnel costs to purchase service costs. For our mechanics, we've had increases in subs as well as assistants because we've been unable to fill those positions. We've also had to add the cost of foster students and homeless students transportation so that they can get to the school in which they reside. We've had an increase in supplies, and it's more of a timing difference. We would income in one year and pay in the next, so it's not something projected throughout the forecast, as well as we had capital outlay costs in the current year offset by a grant. So the grant would reduce some expenses like utilities and personnel, but we were able to then use that funds to purchase the radio system throughout the district. And then we have election expenses and auditor and treasurer fees. The election expenses are not only for the bond issue, but also board elections that the district has to pay for. So in the past, and we always talk about a levy cycle. So you have to ask for more than what you need when you pass a levy in order to break even in the middle of your cycle, and then use those additional funds from the early years in the later years to fund your operations. It's called the bow tie effect, and this is our current picture. As the years shift and we start moving towards the right, the bow tie won't be as perfect, but right now we have the perfect bow tie, so I just wanted to point out. We've talked about it for years, but we've never seen it. This is our funding cycle has been. The blue line is our revenue, and the red is our expenditures, and the green is our cash balance, as well as the black line is our cash balance policy. So you can see in 2019, when our last operating levy, we were dipping down to our cash balance policy, and then our revenue increased, and over time our expenses are projected to increase more than our revenue coming in, which then starts spending down our cash balance carryover. And this is just another way to see that we start deficit spending in fiscal year 24, which is next fiscal year, and we are looking to have a worsening cash balance, which will affect our financial stability over time out towards fiscal year 28. By fiscal year 28, we're looking at about 10% reduction in operations or need for increased revenue in order to maintain operations. In fiscal year 21, we reduced $2.6 million, and that was 2.8% of our budget. Just another picture to be able to show that over time, revenue starts out to be higher than expenses in the levy cycle, and as you go through the cycle, they meet, and then expenses start to increase over the revenue because revenue's flat as it's passed. When we're looking at our community partnership and our 3%, fiscal year 24 does bump up over the 3%, but this is the year that we've been talking about for the past couple years, that we're bringing back some positions that we were able to shift out to ESSER dollars for a few years and then come back, as well as we've had many open positions that are being, that were not in the expenditures in the previous year, in the current year and the previous year, but are projected in next year and the future as these positions are needed for operations. But over the 5-year forecast as a whole, we're at 3.27%, so we're right at around our 3%, and we still have time to adjust things moving forward. When we look at our 60-day cash reserve policy, we meet that for 4 of the 5 years, and we dip below it slightly in the 5th year. Facilities is a part of our financial stability, and it's under our financial stability pillar in our strategic plan. Yeah. All of our buildings, except for Montford Heights and our 3 new elementary buildings, have been identified for replacement, and then they need safety and security upgrades. Any renovations that we do to any of our existing buildings require us to bring that building up to current codes and ADA requirements, which is why it's difficult to do small repairs when you have to then suddenly go in and do a larger scale repair to bring things up to code, to current codes. Any repairs that we would do to our current facilities would also be reducted from any state credits that we'd be able to take advantage of to help our community save funds. We did have $46 million in deferred maintenance. We were able to use $6 million of our ESSER funds to do HVAC upgrades, and those upgrades were done in such a way that we were able to reutilize those into new facilities when we have them, so it's not a loss of funds, but a way to fix it now and then be able to use it again in the future. And currently, our middle schools are over capacity, so we're using all the spaces available within the building, the stage, the locker rooms for instruction and other student services. Our master facility plan was written and passed by the board to address our $40 million in deferred maintenance, as well as the replacements of our facilities, that the cost to replace versus renovate is over 66%. Phase one, we replaced our 3 new elementary, from 5 to 3 for our new elementary schools, and the committee recommended in November of '21 to replace 3 middle schools with 2, to renovate any and update the remaining elementary schools, as well as determine what the community wants for high schools in the future. Currently, the committee is reconvened to relook at the plan and to dive into the high schools a little further, or a lot further. So with financial stability in our strategic plan says we want to create a strong foundation of financial stability that ensures an optimal learning experience for all. In order to do that, we want to make sure that we are able to renew 2 operating levies, emergency levies, that will be coming up for renewal or expire in the near future or during the life of the current 5-year forecast, as well as, instead of needing a operating levy in 2024, which is this November, we have been able to push that out until about fiscal year 28. So I brought you this number at the beginning to keep this on your mind, our class of 2036. We want to make sure that as a district, we align all our resources to our instructional priorities to make sure that all of our students get a quality education with supports and are prepared and ready to compete in the 21st century.